The sun is going to explode in exactly 24 hours. Not a drill, not a simulation, not a government hoax involving weather balloons and unusually well-lit lizards. Just pure, unfiltered, cosmic obliteration with a side of slow-roasted humanity. Welcome to What If Horizons, where we ask the deeply unsettling questions no one else dares to, and answer them with inappropriate humor, scientific guesswork, and a dash of existential dread. So, the sun, that cheerful, blazing orb of plasma we all take for granted while squinting up at it through overpriced sunglasses. It's not just some cosmic nightlight. It's the very reason we're alive. Plants need it. Our climate depends on it. Solar panel companies desperately love it. And now, in this delightful scenario, it's been given an eviction notice from the cosmos with a strict 24-hour deadline. But let's be clear, this is not your typical slow-burning, billion-year death of a star situation. No, this is the Michael Bay version of a stellar demise. An imminent, full-blown supernova detonation. And before any astrophysicists start sending angry emails, yes, we know, our sun is technically too small to go supernova. But in this thought experiment, physics has taken the day off, and logic has been replaced by cinematic urgency. What happens when humanity is told, with absolute certainty, that in exactly 24 hours the sun will go kaboom and everything we've ever known will be reduced to a sizzling afterthought? Well, let's start with the moment the announcement hits. It begins with an emergency broadcast. Every device with a screen lights up. Every satellite beams down the same chilling message: solar instability detected. Total system failure in T-minus 24 hours. People blink, pause, then collectively laugh, assuming it's a new Netflix ad campaign or a viral marketing stunt for the next season of Black Mirror. Until the sky shifts. Not dramatically, just a subtle flicker, a shade dimmer, a strange shimmer at the edge of the sun's corona. And suddenly, the jokes stop. World leaders scramble. Scientists confirm the data. The sun is dying, and this time, no SPF factor is going to help. The finality sets in like cold molasses down the back of your neck. We're toast, and not the buttery kind. Panic, you ask? Oh yes, but it comes in waves. First, disbelief. Social media floods with memes. Guess I won't have to pay my student loans now garners 4 million likes in an hour. Hashtags trend. Hashtag Sunnit was nice, hashtag burnt out not faded, and hashtag apocalypse now with extra guac. But as the truth digs its claws into the collective consciousness, humanity begins its final performance. And what a show it becomes. Airports are mobbed, not to escape, because where would you go? Saturn's Airbnb listings are still pretty sparse, but to reach family, to reunite, to reconcile. People sprint across continents for one last awkward family dinner or to scream at their ex one final, glorious time. Governments try to maintain order. Martial law is declared in 39 countries before noon. Grocery stores are looted not just for essentials, but for pure chaos. Someone in Milwaukee steals exactly 74 jars of mayonnaise. No one knows why. He becomes a meme. His face gets tattooed on a teenager's thigh in Sweden. Humanity is unraveling and laughing while it does. Meanwhile, the super-rich, bless their delusional hearts, retreat to bunkers. Underground palaces with oxygen generators and canned caviar. They still cling to hope, convinced that a few feet of concrete and a subscription to Elon Musk's sunless survival box can outwit thermonuclear starlight. The rest of us? We cope. And coping comes in many forms. Some turn to religion, flocking to churches, temples, synagogues, mosques, and Taco Bells, because if we're being honest, that chalupa is the closest thing some people have to spiritual enlightenment. Others turn to science, not to stop the inevitable, but to document it, to witness it, to leave a record that maybe, just maybe, some alien archaeologist might find floating in the asteroid belt a billion years from now and say, huh, so that's what optimism looked like. And then there's the truly strange. Pet parades, naked skydiving, spontaneous opera in Times Square. A group in Tokyo begins painting giant murals visible from space. One simply says, "We were here. We tried." The arts explode. Musicians perform nonstop concerts, jamming their souls into every chord. Painters slash canvases like it's their final scream. Poets write feverishly, as if verse might slow down cosmic death. It doesn't, but it helps. Meanwhile, somewhere in the chaos, a scientist, one of those quietly brilliant types who usually get ignored until something needs fixing, sits alone, sipping tea, watching the light dim. And she thinks, well, it was always going to end. At least it's ending in color. Because here's the kicker. The end of the world is breathtaking. As the sun destabilizes, it begins to pulse. Colors unseen by human eyes begin bleeding into the sky. The atmosphere becomes a prism. The northern lights? Now worldwide. The oceans glow. Mountains shimmer. For once, Earth doesn't look like a rock covered in bad decisions. It looks like art. In the final hours, people climb rooftops, hills, dunes. They sit with loved ones. Or alone. Or with a stranger whose name they don't know, but whose warmth feels familiar. The sun expands, filling half the sky. Birds stop flying. The wind stills. And humanity, that stubborn, inventive, hilarious species, looks up, together, for the last time. Not with fear, but with awe. Because when it ends, it won't be with a whimper. It'll be with a laugh, a kiss, a scream, a song, a whispered memory of everything we were. 6 hours in, and Earth was starting to feel like a casserole left in the oven too long. Still technically intact, but clearly overcooked around the edges. The oceans hadn't boiled yet, but they were seriously considering it. The atmosphere, ever the polite buffer between us and space, had begun to crackle with electromagnetic tantrums. Satellites winked out like dying fireflies. GPS started suggesting directions through active volcanoes. And your smart fridge? It now only recommended ice cream and regret. But let's rewind just a bit. When the announcement first broke, the very first thing humanity did wasn't pray, cry, or riot. No, it Googled, "Can you survive a supernova?" Shot to the top of search rankings, followed closely by how to make peace with your ex in 24 hours and best last meals for lactose-intolerant people. People wanted closure. And carbs. Governments, in the most bureaucratically on-brand move imaginable, held emergency press conferences with titles like Guidelines for Responsible Apocalypse Behavior. These included helpful tips such as, stay indoors, avoid unnecessary time travel attempts, do not stare directly at the expanding sun without certified end-of-world grade eyewear. And then came the denial industries. Overnight, self-proclaimed solar truthers flooded the internet claiming the sun was fine and the global elite had just installed a dimmer switch. One particularly popular theory argued that the solar explosion was a metaphor designed by Big Pharma to distract from oat milk inflation. But while Twitter raged and doomsday TikToks went viral, ordinary people were quietly becoming extraordinary. A man in Morocco gave away every cent of his savings to help strangers reach their families. A woman in Iceland proposed to the barista she'd awkwardly flirted with for years. He said yes. They were married 2 hours later, wearing matching wool sweaters and grinning like lunatics. In Kenya, a group of engineers used their final day to restore power to a rural village. In Argentina, dancers filled city squares with tango until the pavement cracked. A group of comedians in London live-streamed a non-stop roast of humanity's worst inventions, with the leaf blower taking first prize. It wasn't all noble, of course. In Las Vegas, people tried to bet on the exact time of the Earth's obliteration. A man in Miami attempted to launch himself into space using only balloons, duct tape, and positive vibes. He made it to about 30 feet, declared victory, and passed out from heat stroke. He became a folk hero. But perhaps the strangest moment came from a small town in Finland, where a retired physicist named Elina Savolainen had quietly spent the last decade building a strange device in her barn. When asked what it did, she simply said, "I think it lets you say goodbye properly." No one knew what that meant, until she turned it on. The device emitted a harmonic frequency, barely audible, but deeply felt. People nearby said it made them remember things they hadn't thought of in years. The smell of their grandmother's kitchen, the weight of a childhood blanket, the exact moment they first fell in love. Tears flowed. Arguments ceased. A journalist called it emotional Wi-Fi. The next morning, Alina was gone. No trace. Just her device, still humming gently beside a handwritten note that said, "Be kind to what remains." The sun, meanwhile, was getting bigger. Not metaphorically, physically. It now loomed on the horizon like a divine omelet set to broil everything within 93 million miles. The temperature on Earth rose by 3 degrees every hour. Ice caps screamed silently. Forests sighed. Your neighbor's swimming pool began to double as a hot tub. And yet, despite the slow bake of extinction, humanity remained weirdly human. At precisely hour 10, a group of musicians gathered in Vienna to perform Beethoven's Ninth Symphony on kazoos. In New Zealand, surfers rode waves of boiling foam, claiming, "This is what we trained for." In Japan, monks painted mandalas that melted as they dried, a perfect metaphor for existence if ever there was one. As the heat intensified, priorities shifted. No one cared about taxes, or cholesterol, or whether their Wi-Fi password was secure. What mattered was connection, meaning, memory, and finding the coolest patch of shade that wasn't already occupied by someone roasting marshmallows on a stick while quoting Shakespeare. Technology didn't save us. It couldn't, but it helped us say goodbye. Holographic farewell walls appeared in every major city, letting people leave messages to the void. "Tell Pluto I'm sorry," one read. "Mom, I finally forgave you," said another. "I still love you, even if you took the cat in the divorce," confessed a brave soul in Berlin. And then there was a whisper, a rumor, a hope wrapped in the soft desperation of those with nothing left to lose. A spacecraft, not NASA's, not SpaceX's, something else. It had been hidden, some claimed. A secret project, global in scale, decades in the making. Called simply, the Ark. It could carry a few hundred, maybe 1,000. Chosen not by wealth or power, but by lottery. No one knew where it was launching from. No one knew if it even existed. But the idea, the idea, ignited something primal. Not fear, not envy, but wonder. And in the face of annihilation, wonder was enough. In the next part, we'll follow the rumors of the Ark, the scramble for redemption, and the last great question humanity dares to ask. If we could escape, should we? By the 12th hour, hope was running on fumes, but humanity was too stubborn to stop inhaling it. The sun now filled a third of the sky, its surface bubbling like a lava lamp powered by resentment and unprocessed childhood trauma. Shadows disappeared. The moon? A faint smudge, as if it too had decided to check out early and not deal with whatever the hell this was. And yet, amid the sweat, panic, and philosophical hot flashes, whispers of the Ark spread like a last-minute conspiracy theory that, just this once, might be true. No official announcements, no broadcasts, just fragments of intercepted satellite chatter, anonymous voice messages, and a blurry drone photo of something large, metallic, and decidedly not a weather balloon being loaded onto a launch pad in the Nevada desert. The governments of the world denied everything, of course. One White House official, visibly melting under studio lights, smiled into the camera and declared, "There is no Arkansas. But if there were, we'd definitely not tell you." Smooth. Very reassuring. Still, people began to move. Not because they believed in survival, but because moving gave them something to do besides cry or fight or write oddly specific bucket lists involving Swedish scuba instructors and artisanal cheeses. The pilgrimage began. Families, loners, drifters, believers. Everyone headed toward rumor. Some drove. Some flew. One man rollerbladed across 3 states in a tinfoil suit shouting, "I am ready for the sky." He was hit by a Prius, but declared it a minor setback. Meanwhile, in the digital ether, the world had become a chaotic, poetic mess. Twitter had transformed into a global group therapy session. Instagram feeds were flooded with sunset selfies captioned, "Last light, best light." YouTube was nothing but goodbye vlogs, unboxing videos of survival kits, and one strangely popular tutorial on how to make solar-proof lasagna using only foil and tears. Artists were thriving. They had 12 hours to be remembered forever and treated it like the universe's final open mic night. Musicians created symphonies that would only be heard once. Graffiti bloomed on every wall. We were bright, brief, beautiful. Someone painted the Mona Lisa with a melted crayon and a vengeance. And science? Well, science was having a very quiet breakdown. Physicists no longer talked in absolutes. Equations stopped adding up. One CERN researcher admitted they discovered a new particle that only appears when you're about to die, but they named it Orwellian because, frankly, priorities. NASA stopped running simulations. Instead, they printed a single page that read, Estimated impact in 12 hours. Margin of error, 0. Recommended action, hug somebody. But back to the Ark. Around hour 13, video footage leaked. Not doctored, not faked. Real, grainy, shaky, but unmistakably colossal. A spacecraft, shaped like a curved blade wrapped in solar panels, mounted on a platform the size of a stadium. No flags, no names, just the word ECC etched in massive letters along its hull. Latin scholars lost their minds. Behold, it meant, not rescue or escape, just look. Some claimed it was alien technology, built with reverse-engineered parts from crashed UFOs and assembled by a secret council of scientists, monks, and maybe one confused Starbucks barista. Others believed it had always been there, buried under the sand, waiting for this exact moment. None of that mattered. What mattered was this: the Ark was real. It could leave. It had a destination. And the doors would open, for a few. So how did humanity respond? Exactly as expected. Fights broke out. Bribes were offered. People forged boarding passes using glitter pens and expired library cards. Billionaires flew in on helicopters, flanked by lawyers and spiritual advisors, each claiming priority access because they'd contributed significantly to humanity's vibe. But here's the twist. The Ark didn't care. It ran its own selection. Somewhere inside its systems, somewhere deep in whatever ancient, otherworldly code it operated on, boarding privileges were not granted based on wealth, power, or Instagram following. They were chosen based on something far stranger. Moments. Moments of kindness. Moments no one remembered. A bus driver who gave a crying kid a free ride. A teenager who returned a lost dog. A woman who gave her last umbrella to a stranger in the rain. The Ark remembered. And the Ark called. Names began to appear on digital billboards worldwide. Just first names, sometimes initials, followed by coordinates. People stared at the lists, heart pounding, waiting. You weren't notified. You weren't told why. You either saw your name, or you didn't. Some wept with joy, others with rage. But oddly, most simply understood. There was a strange peace in knowing the selection wasn't fair, but it was meaningful. Meanwhile, the temperature climbed. Birds stopped singing. Skyscrapers shimmered like mirages. Water turned thick. Time felt syrupy, and every clock ticked louder than it should. At hour 15, the Ark lit up. A soft hum, like a lullaby played through alien lungs. Its engines vibrated not with fire, but with memory. It didn't roar, it remembered. And those lucky few? They walked aboard barefoot, blinking, carrying nothing. Because nothing was needed. And still, Earth spun. Because this was not a rescue mission. This was not salvation. This was a witness. A way to carry the story forward. By hour 16, the Earth had begun to sweat in earnest. Not metaphorically. Actual lakes were simmering, sidewalks buckled like bad pastry, and the clouds had simply decided to retire early. The air was so hot it shimmered, bending light into weird, wobbly shapes that made it feel like reality itself had been left too close to the stove. And yet, no one stopped. Not entirely. Those who hadn't made it onto the Ark didn't dissolve into chaos. There were no worldwide riots, no mad stampedes, no final war for dominance. Maybe it was because no one had the energy left to fight. Maybe it was because the sun's slow, glowing betrayal had burned away not just the atmosphere, but the illusion of time, leaving only clarity. People began doing strange, quiet things. In Italy, a man baked one last loaf of bread for everyone on his street. In Thailand, monks gathered to meditate under a tree that was very much on fire, but still somehow beautiful. In Los Angeles, a retired stuntman climbed onto a billboard, strummed a guitar, and played a song called "Don't Worry, It's Only the Sun," while traffic below remained politely immobile. There was no more need to pretend. The age of ambition had ended. The era of branding, posture, productivity evaporated like dew in a blast furnace. No more quarterly reports. No more 10-year plans. Just people, here, now, making choices that mattered only because nothing else did. Some went into the oceans, floating like driftwood under a sky now the color of molten peach. Some stayed in bed with lovers, whispering apologies and poems and jokes so stupid they made the end of days sound like a stand-up routine. Others stood in line for ice cream trucks that refused to stop serving. Free cones for the damned. Toppings optional. One man opened his bar and called it the End Times Tavern. He offered 2 drinks, Solar Flare and Denial on the Rocks. Both were just tequila with different levels of optimism. And still, the Ark hovered. It didn't rush. It didn't gloat. It simply existed, silent, steady, watching, like some galactic librarian recording our final chapter. The people chosen to board weren't famous. Most didn't say goodbye on camera or try to leave behind TED Talks. They just walked away. Some waved. Some cried. Some vanished without a word. And somehow, that felt right. Because what do you say when there's nothing left to explain? Still, others found meaning in being left behind. A street preacher in New Orleans took off his shoes and walked barefoot across hot asphalt, saying he'd promised God he'd touch the earth with unprotected feet until the very end. A scientist in Norway continued taking temperature readings, scribbling numbers into a journal no one would ever read. A child in Brazil painted a picture of the sky and titled it before it was all orange. By hour 17, the sky was no longer blue, not even close. It had gone past orange, deep into a hue that had no name, like someone had melted copper and poured it over the firmament. The sun had ballooned to grotesque proportions, its edges fraying like an overused sponge, its core pulsing with a rhythm that felt suspiciously like a countdown. And in this light, the world began to glow. Not with hope, with honesty. People confessed things. Everywhere. Secrets poured out of lips like steam. Old lovers admitted they'd never stopped loving. Rival siblings embraced. Politicians live-streamed apologies. One man wrote, "I cheated at Uno in 1993 on a massive banner and hung it from a bridge." He was forgiven instantly. You'd think death on this scale would bring despair. But it didn't. Not really. It brought release. The pressure to be anything other than what you were, gone. The pressure to prove, to impress, to grind, to hustle. It evaporated in the ultraviolet glare of apocalypse. And what remained was something quiet, soft, almost human again. Some danced. Some prayed. Some just lay in the grass, what was left of it, watching the sky melt and thinking, so this is how it ends. But no one, and I mean no one, checked their email. By the end of hour 18, heat had become surreal. Cars melted into puddles of regret. Metal objects hissed when touched. Shadows, those comforting, quiet companions of the living, had fled entirely. And yet, people still smiled. Not all, of course, but many. Because somehow, in this bizarre, luminous nightmare, they'd found what they'd been chasing all along. Presence. No distractions. No bills. No past or future. Just one shared, final breath stretched across a dying planet. Inside the Ark, the air was unnervingly still. Not dead still, just considerate. It didn't smell like recycled metal or ozone. It smelled like nothing, which somehow felt intimate. Like a pause held too long between two people unsure of what to say. The walls glowed with no visible light source. No hum of generators. No clunky boots on metal sci-fi nonsense. It was quiet, soft, almost tender. The passengers, if we can call them that, stood in silence. Not out of fear or reverence, but because no one wanted to be the first to ask, so, now what? There were no seats, no cockpit, no buttons, just space, lots of it. And in the middle, a small orb floating calmly, pulsing like it had a heartbeat. Some stared at it, half expecting it to open and reveal a miniature alien wearing bifocals and asking for directions to Alpha Centauri. Others just sat on the floor and stared at the ceiling, which occasionally shimmered like water remembering sunlight. One woman, Alba, a former postmaster from Manila, tried to speak to the orb, not with questions, but with a song. A lullaby her mother used to sing when typhoons rattled the windows. The orb shimmered. A faint echo hummed back. Not the same melody. Not even music, exactly. But it felt kind. Somewhere deep inside the Ark, a wall blinked open, revealing rooms. Not assigned quarters. Not sterile space pods. Just spaces that reflected what the person most longed for. A bench under a willow tree. A kitchen filled with the smell of bread. A room lit entirely by old film reels of childhood birthdays no one else remembered. The Ark, it seemed, knew not what people wanted, but what they had missed. Back on Earth, the sun had started to pulse. Really pulse. Waves of light, visible and not, stretched through space like the final breaths of a god who had lived too long and carried too much. Earth's crust began to groan. Oceans boiled over. The Eiffel Tower softened at the edges like butter left on a radiator. The Great Wall cracked. The pyramids glistened as if sweating secrets they'd held for millennia. And still, people didn't panic. There was nowhere left to run, so they did other things. In Canada, a group of elderly musicians played jazz on a melting rooftop, refusing to stop even as their instruments sizzled. In Ghana, a teacher taught her students until the chalk turned to vapor. In Denmark, a man painted a canvas so large it took up an entire stadium, one stroke at a time, spelling, "I was here." And above it all, the Ark floated. Not rising, not fleeing, just witnessing. Inside, the passengers started speaking, hesitantly at first, then in waves. A baker from Lebanon admitted he had never once tasted his own cakes. A plumber from Mexico confessed he'd written a novel under a pseudonym, and it had won an award, which he kept secret for 17 years. A 9-year-old girl whispered that she had never seen snow and didn't mind, because her dreams made better ones. No one judged. No one corrected. The Ark didn't buzz or beep or issue oxygen warnings. It simply existed. And the more the people inside shared, the more it seemed to respond. Rooms shifted gently. Colors warmed. The orb in the center grew softer, as if cradling their memories. And then came the moment no one expected. Earth spoke. Not literally. There were no giant lips forming in the Himalayas. But deep inside everyone, on board and below, a single sensation bloomed. Farewell. Not regret. Not sorrow. Just a soft hand on the shoulder. A closing of eyes. A final page turned with care. In those hours, humanity became something it had forgotten how to be. Still. Present. Unburdened by what was next. There was no next. There was only this. The Ark, in response, finally moved. Not away. Not yet. But upward. Slowly. As if giving the planet time to say goodbye. Below, the last humans gathered at coastlines and rooftops and open fields, looking up. Some waved. Some laughed. Some simply breathed, long and deep, as if to hold the world inside them just a moment longer. And then, without ceremony, the sun expanded. Not violently. Almost tenderly. A final embrace from the star that had given us everything. Light, warmth, growth, scurvy prevention, and now, ironically, the most glorious death anyone could ask for. The sky went white. Time paused, and the earth, ever dramatic, took its bow. The Ark didn't make a sound as Earth vanished. It didn't weep, didn't cheer, didn't narrate a closing monologue like some interstellar David Attenborough. It simply floated onward, carrying its soft cargo of survivors and memories, a silent bottle adrift in a universe with no address. Through the wide viewing shell, there were no windows, just perception. The passengers witnessed the moment Earth ceased. There was no explosion, no firework finale. Just light. Pure, immense, consuming light that stretched across space like a yawn from the cosmos itself. And then darkness. Not empty, not cold. Just different. As if the stage lights had dimmed and it was finally time to change scenes. No one spoke for a long time. They sat in the silence of new context. The kind of silence where you realize all the things you meant to say before the party ended. What had once been urgent, debts, arguments, meal prep, now existed only as ghost thoughts, echoes from a dimension they no longer inhabited. It wasn't grief that filled the Ark. It was reverence. Earth had gone out like a symphony ending mid-note. Unresolved, yes, but unforgettable. The passengers didn't know where they were going. The Ark offered no itinerary, no flight time, no tray tables, or upright seatbacks. And yet, none of that mattered. Direction, after all, was for people who still thought they could get somewhere. These people were something else entirely. Carriers. Of culture, of language, of stories, yes, but also of absurdity. The little things that didn't make sense even before the sun went rogue. One woman kept humming the jingle from an old chewing gum ad. A teenager doodled superheroes with garden tools for limbs. An old man muttered chess strategies to himself and occasionally called the orb Clarence. The orb didn't mind. In fact, it seemed to like it. With every human quirk, it pulsed just a bit more warmly, as if these nonsensical little habits were the very things keeping it alive. And perhaps they were. Because here's the thing the Ark revealed, not in words, but in experience. The universe isn't moved by perfection. It's moved by peculiarity. The Ark was not a ship in the traditional sense. It was memory given structure, meaning given motion, a collective lifeboat built not from metal, but from accumulated intent. And it responded not to commands, but to honesty. As passengers shared their memories, freely, without audience or agenda, the ship itself transformed. One wall displayed a street in Mumbai, permanently lit by Diwali lamps. Another room filled with the smell of Kansas wheat fields at dusk. There was a hallway that echoed only with the sound of children laughing from a birthday party that had happened decades ago. And somewhere in the middle of it all, a quiet chamber appeared that contained nothing but the sound of rain on a tin roof. No one admitted to creating it, but everyone visited. As hours passed, something else began to happen. Not a message, not a voice, but a presence. The Ark wasn't alone. It didn't encounter alien warships or galactic customs officers. Instead, it passed through a region of space that shimmered, not visibly, but intuitively. Like a feeling, like goosebumps on the soul. And in that space, memories that didn't belong to Earth began to filter in. A snowstorm under twin moons. A song sung by beings with no mouths. The taste of air from a planet made entirely of salt. None of it made sense. And yet, all of it did. The passengers realized, slowly, that Earth hadn't been the first. There had been others, countless others, civilizations long gone, stars that had died before humans even learned how to crawl. And each time, an ark, or something like it, had carried a fragment forward, not to preserve the species, but to preserve the story. Because in a universe that expands without end, stories are the only structure that matter. Back on board, Alba, the postmaster who sang, asked a question out loud. Are we supposed to start over? No one answered. Not because they didn't know, but because it didn't matter. Starting over was a human concept. The universe didn't care about chronology. It cared about expression, continuation, echo. And so, slowly, the passengers began to build. Not with hammers or code, but with imagination. They painted scenes from Earth on the walls, cooked meals using only remembered recipes and fabricated ingredients. They held improvised weddings, funerals, debates about whether pineapple belonged on pizza. It did, according to 62% of them, and one very contentious talent show judged by the orb itself, which, without explanation, always awarded first prize to whoever danced the worst. The Ark wasn't heading somewhere. It was somewhere. A floating culture. A vessel of shared absurdity and significance. A gallery of what had been and what still could be. And outside, beyond the transparent not-quite glass, the stars watched. It happened without fanfare, alarms, or dramatic music. One moment the Ark was coasting peacefully through the silent velvet of space. The next, it had company. Not in the form of ships or transmissions or ominous lights blinking in Morse code. No, the visitor arrived like a feeling. A presence that entered not the vessel, but the conversations inside it. People began to remember things they hadn't lived. A farmer from Tunisia suddenly described, in perfect detail, the sensation of giving birth to a child on a world with lavender skies. A teenage boy from Peru began drawing symbols he swore he'd never seen before, but which matched carvings found in ruins the world had never studied. Alba, our faithful postmaster, awoke from a nap and casually recited a poem, in a language that hadn't existed on Earth. No one panicked. After all, when the sun has already exploded and your home planet is a historical footnote, a little psychic cross-pollination is hardly the strangest item on the agenda. The orb pulsed differently now. Not brighter, but deeper. Its glow became layered, like it was remembering other things too. It drifted closer to a wall of the Ark, and suddenly that wall unfolded, not mechanically, but like a flower blooming in reverse, and revealed a new chamber. Inside, silence, but not just the absence of sound. This was a presence made of stillness. The kind that presses gently against your ribs. The kind that whispers not words, but truths you already knew and had simply chosen to forget. And in the center of that chamber stood something impossible. A mirror, but not just any mirror. It didn't show your face, or your age, or your clothes. It showed your essence, not as you were, but as you were seen, by the universe, by others, by yourself when you were honest enough to look past the noise. Some ran from it, some wept, some laughed uncontrollably, overwhelmed by the absurdity of ever having worried about parking tickets, coffee temperatures, or thigh gaps. And beside the mirror stood the visitor. Not a creature, not even a being in the biological sense. More like a sculpture made of memory. A humanoid shimmer composed of voices, glances, bits of lullabies, regrets that had never been spoken aloud. It didn't speak. It didn't need to. Everyone understood it, as if they'd always known it. It had no name, but if it did, it would be witness. It was simply a memory of another civilization that had once ridden its own arc, long since absorbed into the greater stream of story. It had traveled not to warn, not to teach, but to offer something no one on Earth had even dared to ask for. Acknowledgement. You existed. You mattered. You left a mark. That was it. No reward. No punishment. Just cosmic eye contact. The visitor didn't stay. It never touched anyone. It didn't even linger for dramatic effect. It left the same way it arrived, quietly, through the folds of shared thought. But in its wake, it left something behind. Not a message. Not coordinates. Not a prophecy. It left a seed. Not physical. Emotional. Conceptual. A shared sensation among all the passengers, as if a single word had been whispered into each of their minds simultaneously. Continue. And so they did. They began documenting not history, but emotion. What it felt like to laugh as the sky burned. To forgive someone you never got to see again. To hold someone's hand knowing it was the last time. They created rituals. A nightly tradition of story sharing, where everyone was required to share one ridiculous thing they once believed. I thought clouds were made of mashed potatoes, admitted a Nobel Prize winner. A weekly celebration of failure, where people confessed their most embarrassing moments to thunderous applause. A ceremony for naming forgotten things, lost smells, lost words, lost faces. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the arc began to change course. Not in speed or direction, because it had always been adrift, but in intent. It wasn't heading toward a destination anymore. It was becoming one. It was no longer just a lifeboat of Earth. It was now a library of feeling, a mobile monument to the idea that no experience is wasted if it's remembered. Back in the mirror chamber, the reflection changed. It no longer showed a single person's essence. It showed all of them, intertwined, overlapping, messy and beautiful and occasionally off-key, like a choir that never rehearsed but somehow harmonized. The orb dimmed slightly, not in sadness, in satisfaction. The arc had received its message, and now it would carry it forward. The first new world came into view like a rumor. Not a planet, not at first, just a shimmer in the darkness, a gentle curve on the horizon of nothing. The passengers leaned in, pressing palms to the illusion of glass, squinting into a void that had offered nothing for days, or weeks, or maybe longer. Time was as soft as butter now, and just as slippery. It wasn't Earth. That much was clear. It lacked the familiar hues. No blue oceans, no swirling white clouds, no sunsets to make poets blush. Instead, it glowed with an internal amber, pulsing slowly like a beast in hibernation. A planet that didn't shine from the outside, but from something within, as if it wasn't reflecting light, but remembering it. The Ark didn't ask for votes. It didn't hold a referendum or stage a landing countdown with dramatic music. It simply slowed, tilted, drifted closer. The orb pulsed once, firmly, like a polite knock on the airlock of fate. And then the ramp opened. No steam, no orchestral sting, just a quiet invitation. See what remains when everything else is gone. The first to step out was a small girl, barefoot, fearless, and carrying a peanut butter sandwich in a plastic container. She took one look at the landscape, nodded solemnly, and said, "This'll do." Behind her came the rest. The terrain was strange, but welcoming. Not alien in the horror movie way. Alien in the your grandma's living room after-Shiri decorated kind of way. Different, but somehow deeply familiar. The ground wasn't soil or rock. It was memory made solid, soft to the touch, warm underfoot, faintly echoing with laughter, as if the very land had once been a child. Trees grew, but not with leaves, with lights. Each branch swayed slightly even without wind, and their glow shifted color depending on who walked beneath them. They weren't just reacting, they were listening. And the air? It tasted like the moment you forgive someone. Not sweet, not bitter, relieving. The passengers didn't colonize. That word felt obscene now. They didn't settle, or terraform, or claim. They collaborated. With the land, with each other, with whatever silent intelligence pulsed beneath their feet. They didn't plant crops, they planted moments. A joke told by a fire became a fruit-bearing tree by morning. A shared secret, whispered into the soil, bloomed into a flower that hummed the memory of it when touched. It wasn't science. It wasn't magic. It was emotion metabolized. This planet didn't need to be tamed. It needed to be understood. And slowly, it began offering gifts. A pool appeared, filled not with water, but with reflections of childhoods. Each person who gazed into it saw a different scene. Not always accurate, but always true. Caves opened like mouths and echoed back your own voice, not as it was, but as it would be, had you lived without fear. Rocks rearranged themselves into shapes that could only be read when you weren't trying to read them. Instructions for living. Advice from no one in particular. This was not a new Earth. It was a second draft of being. A place that didn't punish. It revealed. And the people, those few who had been selected, not by merit but by kindness, understood their task. Not to rebuild skyscrapers or smartphones or economic systems, but to build a memory worth remembering. They didn't resurrect nations. They invented neighborhoods of trust. Homes made of shared stories. Kitchens that changed size depending on how many people needed soup. They wrote a new calendar, but not by days or months. By feelings. Year of letting go. Season of honest mistakes. Tuesday of small victories. Time was now emotional, not chronological. And somehow it worked. They created new holidays. Forgiveness Day. Whisper Festival. The Great Nap. They taught their children math, yes, but also how to sit with discomfort, how to laugh at their own shadows, how to cry without apology. The ark still hovered above, but now it was mostly silent. Watching, preserving, a backup drive for the soul. Alba, still humming, became something of a leader, not by choice, but by rhythm. People followed her because she made them feel centered. She once said, "We don't need a government. We need a garden." And everyone agreed without entirely knowing what it meant. And in that moment, the ground beneath her bloomed into violets that sang. They didn't name the planet. That felt presumptuous. They simply called it here, because that was enough. It started with a voice, not a scream, not a wail of panic, just a voice, slightly louder than it needed to be, cutting through the soft rhythm of communal peace like a fork scraping ceramic. "I want it back," said Martin. Martin was a librarian from Glasgow, known aboard the Ark for his quiet wisdom and unusually aggressive sneezes. On the New World, here, as they called it, he'd taken to constructing small alcoves of thought, miniature domes filled with books that weren't really books, but projections of books he remembered. He'd curated entire shelves of vanished literature from memory, including a suspiciously well-constructed replica of the Twilight series, which no one had the heart to question. But Martin had stopped building. He'd started demanding. "I want Earth back," he repeated, now standing in the reflection pool. His boots disrupted the memories, which rippled into chaos. Childhoods fragmented under his heels. At first, people assumed grief. A delayed reaction. Maybe a guilt spiral triggered by watching an entire species dissolve into starlight while surviving it himself. Totally understandable. But Martin wasn't grieving. He was obsessing. He began to recreate things. Not abstract memories or metaphorical gardens like everyone else, but exact replicas. The corner of his childhood street. A newsstand that had sold tabloids featuring Bigfoot. A Starbucks, complete with fake cash register and a cardboard cutout of a barista named Craig. It was uncanny. Too sharp. Too Earth. The planet itself, so responsive, so adaptable, began to strain under the pressure. Trees dimmed when Martin passed. The whispering grass grew silent near his replicas. The memory fruit wouldn't sprout within 100 feet of anything he built. People grew uneasy. Not angry, just uncertain. Because while everyone had carried Earth with them in some form, Martin had started trying to resurrect it. Brick by brick, street by street, history by obsession. Then came the library. He built it overnight. Or rather, willed it. A towering, gray monstrosity of glass and steel, completely out of sync with the soft curves and organic logic of here. It loomed like a gilt monument. Inside it, every book that had ever existed on Earth. Every book. It's not memory, he told Alba when she confronted him. It's record. Truth. What we were. Alba didn't argue. She just placed a hand on the nearest wall of the building. It pulsed cold beneath her fingertips. The arc began to respond. Not visibly, not with sirens or evacuation procedures, but subtly. The orb dimmed. The mirror chamber rippled uneasily, reflections distorting like a bad signal. The skies darkened, not with weather, but with doubt. Because the planet was not designed for replication. It was meant for continuation, for evolution, for becoming. Martin was trying to rewind a cassette tape that had already melted. Then the birds stopped flying. Not because they died. There were no real birds, after all, just the idea of birds. But even those ideas needed room to breathe. And Martin's corner of Earth was taking up too much memory. So Alba made a decision. She gathered the community, not with laws, not with force, but with rhythm. She sang her lullaby, and people followed. They stood outside Martin's concrete temple of yesterday and waited. When he finally emerged, blinking into the soft light, she simply asked, "Why?" He looked at her for a long time, then said, "Because I'm afraid. If we don't preserve what we were, we'll forget we ever existed." She nodded. "But if we refuse to change, we'll never exist again." The words hovered, not like accusations, like invitations. Martin didn't answer. But that night, the tower dissolved. Not collapsed. Dissolved. The planet gently reabsorbed it, as if saying, "I'll hold this for you." But not like that. And from the spot where it had stood, a tree grew. A strange one, with bark made of unread newspaper clippings, leaves shaped like library stamps, and a single fruit hanging low, glowing faintly with the scent of nostalgia and rain. Martin took a bite and smiled. From that day forward, they created differently, not to replicate, but to reflect, to reinterpret. Earth wasn't a map anymore. It was a metaphor, and the past didn't vanish. It rippled forward, reshaped in laughter and stumbles, in stories about a home that had burned too bright to last. The ark didn't make a sound when it departed. It simply blinked, gently, like a tired star, and was gone. One moment it hovered above here, ever watchful, ever listening. The next, it had folded itself into the fabric of space like a well-read page being turned, without drama or farewell banners. And yet, everyone on the ground felt it. Not with sadness, but with something far stranger. Permission. The ark had stayed long enough. It had carried them, preserved them, reminded them. Now it had left them with the only gift that truly mattered, the burden of becoming something new. From that day forward, there was no more talk of returning. Earth was no longer a blueprint. It had become myth, lesson, cautionary tale, and lullaby. The children born on here never saw skyscrapers, never touched asphalt, never tasted plastic. And yet they knew what it meant to love those things, because stories survived where concrete failed. The world continued to shape itself according to feelings. One village grew entirely out of laughter and sarcasm, its walls soft and springy and echoing with chuckles. Another was carved from grief, not sadness, but deep, respectful grief, and the buildings there shimmered in grayscale and smelled like warm rain. They didn't measure time by sunrises anymore. The planet had its own rhythm. Days followed the arc of conversation. Seasons were dictated by emotional climate. There was no summer, no winter. There were periods of trust, of doubt, of rebirth, of collective silence. A language emerged, not spoken, but shared. A glance, a hand on a shoulder, a memory passed from one to another without ever needing to be explained. Entire debates could be held in a minute of silence, and nobody interrupted. Not because they were polite, because they understood. And yet, Earth was never forgotten. A central clearing remained, the memory grove. In it grew a single towering tree, nurtured by everyone's recollections. Its leaves flickered with colors no spectrum could define. If you sat beneath it long enough, it would whisper to you, not in voices, but in impressions. The sound of your father tying his shoes. The smell of a market you visited once. The gut-drop thrill of being 10 years old and realizing you were finally faster than your older brother. Every now and then, someone would return from the grove in tears. Not from sadness, from recognition. They were still human. Somewhere out there, the ark continued drifting. Empty now, or maybe not. Maybe it carried a trace of everyone who ever boarded it, like fingerprints on the handle of a well-loved mug. Maybe it would visit the next civilization to lose itself. Or maybe it had dissolved into the universe entirely, its purpose fulfilled, its story complete. One child, born long after Earth became a story, once asked Alba, what was the point of all that? If the sun exploded and Earth vanished, then wasn't it all meaningless? Alba, older now, smiled. No, it was messy, and beautiful, and short, but not meaningless. That's the trick. Meaning doesn't exist until we decide something matters. Earth mattered because we let it matter. The child nodded, then wandered off to build a sandcastle out of echoes. That night, the sky shimmered, not with stars, but with reflections, glimpses of other arcs, other peoples, other desperate races who had fled burning homes with nothing but stories and sorrow and hope stuffed in their pockets. Maybe they would meet. Maybe they wouldn't. It didn't matter. What mattered was this. They remembered. And in remembering, they created. In creating, they healed. And in healing, they became more than survivors. They became the next story. Welcome to What If Horizons, where the end is never really the end. Thanks for listening. If this story meant something to you, even just a whisper of a feeling, consider sharing it. Leave a comment. Pass it on. Keep the story alive. Because as long as someone remembers, Earth is never truly gone.